Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Leighton in Boise, Idaho.
Hey guys, this is Leighton from Boise, Idaho. My question for you today is regarding the new laws for the 529 College Savings Plan. A little bit about myself. I'm 31 years old. I have a PharmD MBA and have checked most of the financial acuity boxes like having an emergency fund, paying off school loans, utilizing my employer's match, 401k, IRA, HSA. I have 3 children, ages 4, 2, and 0, that I'd like to save for their college expenses. I had previously been tentative about locking those funds in a 529 plan. However, with the new laws, I'm not only no longer worried, but my wife and I have also opened up 529 college savings plans for ourselves. With no plans to return to school, our intent would be to roll the funds into our Roth IRAs beginning 15 years from now. If we're looking at this opportunity right, we will be able to roll $35,000 each into our Roth IRAs right about the time that we turn 50. It appears with the new laws, there are now tax-advantaged incentives for every individual, student or not, to have a 529 plan with at least $35,000 inside. Thoughts?
Thank you, Leighton, for submitting your question we featured on this week's segment of the podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a great question, Leighton, and thanks for the rundown of everything that you're doing. Sounds like you have a good financial foundation. Yeah, and this is kind of cutting edge. You know, this is a change brought about the Secure Act 2.0, Tim, which sounds like a movie, but it was actually signed into law by President Biden on December 29, 2022. And the Secure Act actually stands for the Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act. So everyone likes a good acronym. Ex-military pharmacists love acronyms. So that's what the Secure Act actually stands for. What this part of the rule is really meant to do is to address, some of Leighton's concerns and other parents' concerns of funds being trapped inside of a 529 because their child didn't go to college or whatever that may be. It is also to encourage parents to start saving for college earlier. What often happens is if you make a non-qualified withdrawal, you get a 10% penalty on what you withdraw. So if I put money into my daughter's 529 and then, there's $10,000 in there and she doesn't go to college, I don't really know what to do with that. Now, I would probably give it to a kid like my other kids or, maybe even a grandkid. But I think there is a misperception out there that there's a 10% penalty on everything. And it really just would be a 10% penalty on the growth portion of that. So the earnings. So I kind of want to say that I think this is a rule that's a kind of a step in the right direction. But I do think that some of the 529 concern can be blown a little bit out of proportion. Yeah. Just like a Roth, Tim, if you put money into a Roth, even if you don't use it for retirement, the basis or what the taxable amount that you've put in, you can take out at any time.
Yeah, without penalty. Yep.
Correct. So that's a big, I think, kind of misnomer about this. So although it's a step in the right direction, I don't think that the penalties that, people talk about with the 529s are that, that big of a deal. But the big rule here is that the Secure Act 2.0 allows for a 529 to Roth IRA transfer. So there's kind of like a escape route for those trap funds, so to speak. So beginning in 2024, so a lot of the Secure Act, there's things that happened immediately. This is a year from now. So beginning in 2024, you can roll any unused 529 funds into a Roth IRA without incurring a penalty. There's some people that's going to benefit this immediately. So there was a study by the Federal Reserve in 2016, so a little bit dated, that there was about 12.3 million accounts, 520 accounts with an average account balance of 21,000. And I'll kind of go through some of the rules. So that would benefit those savers immediately. Now, for Leighton's questions, he's kind of thinking about this, and I appreciate this question. He's kind of thinking about this from a strategy, from a long-term perspective. So the way it is, the way the rule is written, is that the transfer, it must be moved directly from the 529 to the Roth IRA. So it has to be a direct transfer for this to be eligible. It has to be in the same name, Tim. So the Roth IRA receiving the funds must be in the same name as the beneficiary of the 529. And you can change the beneficiary of the 529 to make that work.
Yep.
But we don't really know the long-term consequences of that. And I'll kind of go through that in a second. The 529 contributions and earnings go into the Roth IRA in like kind. So it basically is a transfer of those assets and the investments that you have go into the 529. The beneficiary must have compensation. So that means that that person has to be working. So if I think about my kid now, she's not necessarily working, but in the future, she would be. The 529 must be maintained for 15 years or longer. So this is one of the big sticking points. So this is where the government's really trying to say, okay, we're going to allow this, but you need to kind of think of this as a long-term play. So you have to open up the 520. If we think about kids, going to school at age 18, you have to open this up, in their first 3 years of life. So one of the things I mentioned, a couple seconds ago was it's really unclear exactly how a change in beneficiary will be treated. So if I open up an IRA or a 529, or if I open up a 529 in Olivia's name, and then Olivia's like, hey, Dad, I don't want to go to college. I'm going to do something. I'm going to, start a business. Then if I change that beneficiary over to Liam, our second kiddo, I don't know if that resets the clock. That's still undetermined,
unknown,
in the law. That 15-year rule might cause kind of similar to the 5-year rule with Roths, where, you can use a Roth for a first-time home purchase if the holding period or it's been open for at least 5 years. You might have people open up a 529 with small balances just to kind of get the clock started. There is a new 5-year rule with the 529 plan, also in addition to the 15 rule, that says any contributions to the 529 within the last 5 years, and this also includes the earnings on those contributions, are ineligible to be moved to a Roth IRA. So I think in the question, it's like, can I move these dollars over in 15 years? You can, but not for those contributions that happened in the last 5 years.
Last 5. Mm-hmm.
Correct. And the other thing is it's really confusing because it also says earnings, which means that I could put the money in today and not do anything with it, but then I could have earnings yesterday that has to stay in there for 5 years. That's another part of the rule that doesn't really make any sense because you're always going to almost be chasing unless you have a loss. The transfer is subject to IRA contribution limits. So you can put up the, if it was done today, and this number will obviously go up over the years, but if I put in $6,500 into my IRA, then I can't, or my Roth IRA, I can't transfer over any dollars because $6,500 is the math, or is the max. So let's say I put $0 in, then I could put $10,000 into an IRA in a 529. I could move $6,500 into that Roth IRA from the 529. So it just says that you can't put any more than the contribution limit. And then the other thing that is not great, but it's a start, is that the maximum lifetime transfer to a beneficiary is $35,000, not indexed for inflation. So again, what they're trying to do, to go back to that number where there's over 12 million accounts at 21,000, I think they're trying to, at least in the immediate term, say next year, allow people that feel that these funds are stranded to move it over to their Roth IRA and kind of get it out of the 529.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get parents to save earlier. They're trying to get parents to be okay with putting the money into a 529 because there is an alternative plan. But how does this actually happen in real life? So I think what you're going to see, and Leighton kind of mentioned it, is that I think you're going to see a lot more parents start 529s in their name. And I'm thinking about it from our perspective, Tim. We can put up to $4,000 for each kid and get a $4,000, or $8,000 because we have 2 kids, state deduction for the state of Ohio. So, I mean, in reality, I think you could do that, 4,000 times, 4 people in our family to get a $16,000 deduction. So you could do it from that perspective. The other interesting thing about there is because there is no income limit. So most of our listeners know that if you make us above a certain amount of money, like the Roth IRA contribution slams shut. Like I can't put any money into a Roth IRA because I make too much money. So then that gets in the whole backdoor IRA conversion circus that is, subject to the step transaction rule and the pro rata aggregate rule, which is a real pain in the neck. So that this could be a way to kind of circumvent that. You're going to say, I'm going to leave that alone, but I'll put X amount of dollars, knowing that at the end of the rainbow, I can move, and then when I get to 35,000 or close to it, I'll be able to, move those dollars over. It could be that you use the parents' 529, and then you can do 529 to 529 transfers as well. So when you get closer and you have more information about what your kids are going to be doing as they get to post-secondary, it could be that's the move. So it could be that you have 529s for the parents and 529s for the kids, as a planning tool. I think that you'll continue to see the expansion of 529s, their use and flexibility. That's why I'm bullish on 529s. I think you'll start to see even more flexibility on this rule. Like I could see them where they're going to index the 35,000 for inflation. I don't know this for sure. This is just me conjecturing. But if you think back in the day when 529s came onto the scene, it was really just for college. And then they changed it to, K through 12.
Vocational.
You couldn't use a 529 to purchase like software or computer. And then they changed that rule. You couldn't use it for trade schools. And then they changed that rule. And I think you're going to see that, continue to swing in those directions. Even to pay off student loans, I don't think it was until 2020 where they changed the rule that, if you had money left over in a 529, you could make a distribution to pay off a student loan. Now that's still capped at $10,000, which is ridiculous in my, to me, it's
silly.
Yeah. If there's money there, pay it off. But I still think that these rules are going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
And this is really just a step in the direction of, okay, the 520 now can kind of be seen as a dual use. Same thing when we talked about the HSA. The HSA you can use for health expenses today, or it could be kind of that stealth IRA. Maybe the 529, maybe we can start calling that the stealth Roth IRA. Because, it can kind of have the same effect if you're thinking about this in, many, many years of planning.
Tim, are we expecting, I'm thinking of how pharmacy laws are passed where, the state legislature passes a law and then the board of pharmacy writes the rules that basically are the interpretation of the law. And that's where a lot of the questions and the, what about this, what about that come up. Should we expect something like that? The questions you're asking, the points about, the timeline and resetting, do we expect more information to come out before 2024?
So I know they kind of send out like a summary of the rules. And then I think a lot of, the tax nerds and planners will like mash it up and try to get some clarification. I don't know if it's, I suspect yes over the course of the year, because there's rules that again are immediate. Like one of the rules now is that you can set up a SEP Roth IRA. So if you're self-employed, you can set up a SEP Roth IRA. They signed that into law at the last days of 2022, but like functionally, I'm sure 2 months in the year, 3 months in the year, like now you can do it, but functionally you couldn't like start the new year with, hey, I want to set it up, because they just hadn't even like wrote the code for that.
Yeah.
So I suspect yes, as we kind of get closer, that there's going to be more clarification by the IRS, by the legislator, to like, see where. And I think the biggest thing that I would be concerned about is the flexibility to change beneficiaries. Does that reset the clock in any way? And that's one of the things that I like about the 529, that if my oldest doesn't decide to go to college, I can always, revert that to the second child. If there's money left over, I can revert that to the third child, and then I'm even thinking grandkids. So I don't get too hung up on that. I think that there's not enough money to go around. We're not personally, funding 100% of our kids' education. We're kind of focusing on that 1/3 rule. But I think for parents that do think of the 529 as it can trap the funds, I would say that this is a step in that right direction, / the penalty is not as great as you might think, / I think that the rules will continue to evolve. I would feel really good, especially if I'm in a state that the 529 is decent and there's a state tax deduction there, and knowing that those funds are going to grow tax-free inside of the 529, I would feel really good about using that, even if it's for a trade school or obviously you can use it for K through 12. All those things are on the table now. So that's my thought.
Yeah. And for those that are looking for more information on the 529, what is it? What are some of the ways it can be leveraged? We've talked about this before on the show, episode 211, in and out of 529. We'll link to that in the show notes, as well as a blog, 7 things to consider before starting on 529. We'll link to both of those in the show notes. And Tim, as you mentioned, this is a great question. I think that we know we've got, like Leighton, you mentioned 3 children, 4, 2, and sounds like a newborn, obviously thinking about this proactively as they build out their financial plan. And I would just encourage people, these are great technical conversations. But one of my fears here, Tim, is that we're kind of losing the bigger picture as people are, looking at the financial plan. And sometimes we see a tax advantage or a new rule come out, and it's like, maximize, 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 right? I think that's what we want to do as pharmacists. We want to optimize, and all of that is great. And I think as Leighton laid out, he's got a great foundation. It sounds like he's building from, and optimization, it sounds like makes sense. But ensuring we're taking that step back, right? Which I think is such a valuable part of the planning process of, hey, what is the philosophy we have on saving for kids' college? And if it's 2 people doing this together, are we united on that vision? And then once we develop that, okay, what's the plan in which we can execute, with the 529, of course, being one method. And then even a step back further from that is, how does kids' college saving fit within the broader financial plan? And so, I think it's just such a good reminder of, yes, there's opportunities here to optimize, but making sure that we consider those in the context of everything else that's going on in the financial plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you never want it to, a lot of these rules are designed to incentivize, people to do certain things. So obviously this is an education and a kind of a retirement play. But to me, we always kind of talk about, like, don't do something just because it has a tax benefit. You have to, you kind of, look at the 30,000 foot view and say, okay, how does this fit into my financial plan? How does it fit into my life plan? And see if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think probably, and I don't know why this is, but I think kind of the going rate on 529s is like, well, it's kind of uncertain. I don't know. And I really think that, especially with this new rule, that there's just a lot more, and I think rules in the future, there's going to be a lot more flexibility to use these funds for kids or your retirement, or even their retirement in the future. So definitely a great point about keeping the broader perspective in mind.
Leighton, again, great question. Thank you for taking time to submit the question so that we could discuss this. Thank you also for listening to the podcast. We're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt as a small thank you. And for those that are listening, we would love to feature your question on an upcoming episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the podcast. 2 ways you can submit a question. 1, you can email us info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record your question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/askyfp. As we wrap up this week's episode, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is for informational purposes only, is not intended to provide, and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your week.